Welcome back, film fans. It's part 3, almost done, of my countdown of the 10 movie franchises that I either really dislike or I'm different towards, don't really care about. That it's 10 movie franchises that, if you're a cinephile or a film lover, you're kind of expected to love. So it's the 10 movie franchises I'm supposed to love, but I just don't. For reasons that for each entry I'll get into. I'll put a link in parts 1 and 2 if you've missed those, where part 1 and 2 respectively. Part 1 I looked at, I'm counting down from 10 to 1, so part 1 looked at my rankings from 10 to 8, and then 7 to 5 was part 2, and this will be covering 4 to 2, because I thought I'm talking not overly at length about each of these entries, but enough to like kind of justify them doing in separate videos, in case I waffle too much or rant too much, which can be prone to happening, depending on what I'm talking about, but in regards to these specifically so. And then I thought, because the number 1 entry is going to be one which I kind of have a lot to say about, I thought, let's just leave that as a separate video, because I'll probably go a few minutes on that just alone. So let's get straight into it. Remember, these are kind of, so a lot of these entries are of where I, at this point really, I don't really have anything to, if I've seen any of the franchise in question, I don't really have anything to recommend really. So it's going to be kind of like pretty much wholly negative from here on, I think. So brace yourselves and strap in, I suppose. So for number 4, saying that though, actually number 4, maybe I do have some positives, but number 4, and this might piss a lot of people off because obviously this is a hugely popular franchise. It's had several iterations and reboots, etc., etc. And that's one of the reasons why I dislike it so much, is Batman. This part of this it stems from a kind of indifference. So, you know, obviously I didn't grow up with the original kind of Batman related stuff or merch, TV show, the movie from the 60s. But of course, it really took a kind of a whole new trajectory with Tim Burton's Batman in '89, starring Michael Keaton. And then you had that iteration with obviously that and Returns. Then you had Val Kilmer play him in Batman Forever. When was that? Was that 95? And then you had, which of course had the kind of the dual villains of Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones. Then you had Batman and Robin in, what was that, 97 or 8, which is widely regarded as one of the worst movies ever made. And then you had the reboot for the Christopher Nolan reboot, which is obviously the trilogy of Begins, Dark Knight Rises. Then you've had since, and this is where I start to lose track, but you've had Batman versus Superman, and you've had Batman with Robert Pattinson playing Batman, which was like a really kind of, was that rated in 18? Like an overly dark, somber Batman. But essentially you've had Ben Affleck play Batman, Robert Pattinson play Batman. I think you might have had some other tie-ins as well. At this point I've lost track, okay? But I feel like it says something when there's been multiple reboots that feels like within my adult lifetime. And I'm not that old of an adult. It's not like I'm in my 50s or my 60s, or like I grew up with the original series, like I said before. So I feel like when they start like milking, and then you get the same issue with the Spider-Man franchise, right? The only reason I haven't listed the Spider-Man franchise is because I am actually a fan of Sam Raimi's first 2 movies. But there's been like multiple reboots of that franchise, all kind of different takes with the kind of the animated feature films that have come out, that it's genuinely hard for someone who like isn't an over kind of super fan to keep up. And you get this problem where like films no longer become films, they kind of feel like they're content. And that's how I feel like the Batman, even though like I understand there's like distinct eras of the Batman movies, I feel like that's where it's gone, or at least where it's going. Even though I know there are a lot of people that were fans of the Robert Pattinson version, but I think that was like 3 hours long or something. And so it feels like there's 2 camps where like Batman's either overly camp and people either take to that or they don't, or it's kind of overly somber serious, which is like the more kind of like, or a bit more artsy. They have like artsy pretensions. And that's like the Nolan Batmans and the kind of like the recent iteration with Robert Pattinson. I can't remember who directed that, actually, to be fair. Now, my preference actually is is, I think there's, like I said, there's several factors as to why I don't really like any of the Batman movies in general. Like I'm a huge Batman fan. First off, I think he's like one of the least interesting of all the superheroes. Like one of the least interesting. Kind of, you know, the idea of, but also like probably the purest distillation of like what a superhero is in terms of what they represent. Like and what I mean here is kind of like philosophically or like politically maybe, you know. Bruce Wayne being the kind of like rich boy character who then goes and hunts down and kills. Essentially, it's like Death Wish, but the superhero version. It's like vigilantism, right? So, but, so it's kind of like the clearest distillation, really, of a kind of that superhero mold, which is probably why I find it the least interesting. Even though, as you can see, you get wildly different takes in between directors or kind of iterations of the franchise. I'll hereby state my preference probably for Tim Burton's version of Batman, even though I'm not a huge fan of Tim Burton. And this is another problem as well. So as an entry point, I'm not a huge fan of Tim Burton's movies in general or his style. Then you get Joel Schumacher's, which I could argue is a guilty pleasure because those are the ones I grew up with the most, which is Forever, which is Val Kilmer's one, and also is Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones, who I have kind of a lot of time for as actors. And you know, you might love or hate that depending on again how camp it is, but also how much you can tolerate Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones, because those two try and outdo each other in the kind of overacting stakes in that film. And Batman and Robin, you know, I saw that in the cinema, and even as a kid, I kind of thought there's something really wrong with this movie, and I don't know what it is. It just is completely, I don't know. And it suffers from the same problem that Raimi's Spider-Man 3 did, which is where they just overstuffed too many kind of villains and characters into it, where they kind of get sidetracked and sidelined. So it would be Bane in Batman and Robin, and then in Spider-Man 3, it was, you know, they had the Sandman as well as Venom as well. It's just, and then the whole like bad Spidey arc, you know, it's just like, it was way too much. And which is very weird considering you had Raimi directing it. It's so there should have been at least a kind of tonal consistency, but Spider-Man 3 went way off. Anyway, then Nolan's Batman's, I mean, I have issue with a lot of issues with Nolan's Batman's films. Although saying that, I have to profess I've never seen Batman Begins. So that's probably that again. Although I've seen The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. Dark Knight Rises I thought was terrible. Dark Knight, I remember really liking when I first saw it, and then when I rewatched it, I saw more and more problems with it, and I just, you know, I think it's Nolan's not really interested in the Batman franchise. He's interested in kind of using that as a kind of launch pad to do almost like make a serious superhero movie in the vein of, you know, kind of, he's very much inspired by Michael Mann's Heat. But Dark Knight's not a patch on that film, in my opinion. So, yeah. And then I haven't seen any of the recent ones. So I think it's just, again, it's the kind of the nature of the superhero for me, the source material, coupled with the fact that originally it was in the 60s, and then I'm not a huge fan of Burton, and I'm not a huge fan of Nolan, and Joel Schumacher's are just not that great movies, in my opinion. And it seems like it's like a kind of franchise that constantly has these false starts or promising starts that then kind of go into nothing, that mean that you could find that very interesting, but someone that's doesn't have a vested interest from the beginning, and then I'm just sick of the kind of the stutters and the false starts. And there's some people that think that there hasn't even been a decent Batman movie since ever, that like they've ever got it right, really, or at least since the 60s. So, yeah, I mean, that's probably my reason there. So I don't have a hatred for the franchise, but I am baffled as to like how often it's been rebooted and how successful, at least financially, these reboots seem to be. And then you've got the Batman versus Superman thing, which is, I hate the whole combining of universes. I can't remember what was the first thing that did it? Was it Alien versus Predator? I despised that. So I don't like the whole crossing two different cinematic universes, if you like. I don't like it at all. I think it's stupid and just fucking dumb, if you ask me. But it never works from what I've seen. So that's my number 4. Spent way too long on that. Let's go to number 3. Right, so number 3 is the Fast and Furious franchise. I've used this word baffled a lot in my series. I am so baffled as to how this franchise is so successful, how this franchise has made billions with a B, yeah, not millions, but billions, and has made, is it 10 movies now? I tapped out on number 5. So I haven't even seen the first 5. I've seen 1, 2, and 3, and 5. Fast and Furious, the first film. The reason why this isn't higher, the reason why this isn't at number 2 on my list is because I think the first film, even though it's an inferior remake of Catherine Bigelow's Point Break, which is a far better movie, and watch that instead. It is an inferior remake of that. Even though it is, at least it was a somewhat half-sincere attempt to make a film about a kind of subculture, street racing. It at least had some kind of background or attempt to kind of put us into that world, right? And then kind of do the Point Break remake from there, right? Just replace surfboards with souped up cars. However, okay, it was an okay movie. Then you got the second one, which is kind of like the buddy cop iteration of it, right? Okay, naff, but whatever. Then you got the third one, which, okay, it took a different direction, Tokyo Drift, and kind of at least kind of returned to the whole street racing-y kind of roots of the franchise. And then I must admit, I just never caught the fourth, which was kind of like, I always forget this. Is that called Fast and Furious? And then the first one's called The Fast and the Furious. Switch it if I'm wrong, whatever. Which kind of introduced the main core characters, because I think the third one didn't do as well because it was too much of a spin-off. And then, so the fifth one, the one where I tapped out, I went with my best friend and his partner at the time to the cinema. Kind of, I was a third wheel, so to speak. I tagged along because I was invited. Wouldn't invite myself, especially to this movie. I kind of thought, it's getting actually pretty good reviews or whatever, and people, it seems like it's popular, so what the hell. Went along. Probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen in the cinema. Not exaggerating, I'm not saying that for hyperbole or effect. I thought, I was like, what the hell has happened to this franchise? Surely that's the death of it. Nope, it turns out that is, not only is it one of the most fondly thought of films of the franchise for some, but it's actually the turning point in which the franchise becomes, and I hate, I don't know if I said this before, but I hate it when franchises do this, where the characters in the fifth film felt like completely different, like they had brain transplants. They don't resemble the characters of the original film, and so many franchises do this. I get you have different writers and directors, and you kind of want to go in a little bit of a different creative direction and do something new or interesting to keep it fresh. But when you start with the first film that ostensibly is well liked, which is why you have sequels, why do you veer so far from the model and the characterization that made them likable and interesting in the first? In the fifth, it is essentially just becomes a generic action movie. A generic, like, kind of late 2000s action movie where all physics are suspended, overuse of CGI, dumb use of just abandoning logic and physics. I mean, when they pulled the safe, there's like a kind of heist element to this movie. And I think it's set in Rio de Janeiro, I think, in the favelas. And they pull out like a bank vault with two cars tied to chains, I believe. Where's friction? Where's, like, it's just, you can't even suspend your disbelief. And then apparently, like, they've gone even further, like the whole driving cars out of airplanes and stupid shit like that. And apparently have they even gone to space, or is that just a joke? I genuinely take that, like, that they've done that, because, we're getting to like Bondian elements of what can they really do at this point, because even James Bond went to space. But like, it's with this, it's like, these are just meant to be some street racing dudes who are like breaking some sense of illegality, but why are they kind of like superhero? And then the sequence, because The Rock's in Fast and Furious 5, where The Rock fights Vin Diesel, and they're kind of like two massive kind of steroid fueled dudes smashing through walls, and again, physics are suspended because they're able to just throw each other, even though they're probably like 300 pounds each. And it's just like, again, I was like, this is so dumb. And I remember that film being so full of plot holes and not really making much sense. I was like, and then there's been 5 more. I think Paul Walker's death really his premature death, which of course was sad. But I remember thinking, it was sad and upsetting, but at the time I was like, you would have thought like it was James Dean that died or something, like Elvis Presley, or it was like a lot of people. It just showed me how I misjudged how beloved that franchise was. But yeah. So yeah, I've said enough about that. Just watch Point Break or watch the first one. The rest, naff, as far as I'm concerned. And number 2, we have Transformers. So we've had a franchise that's based upon a theme park ride. Now we've got a franchise that's based upon a toy. And yes, I mean, we've had the success recently of another one, another movie that's based on a toy, Barbie, which I still haven't seen, which is kind of embarrassing to me because it was like the biggest smash hit of, Barbenheimer was the kind of biggest smash hit of last summer, wasn't it? But at least that seemed like it had like an interesting direction or something to say or kind of interesting subtext or whatever. But so obviously it started again, no entry point for me here. I didn't grow up with the cartoon series. I didn't have any of the toys when I was a kid, so that doesn't help. Never saw the 80s. Is there like a movie from 84, like an animated movie? The first one I saw was Michael Bay's Transformers from 2007. Probably if I could pick like things that are emblematic from like shitty modern Hollywood filmmaking, Transformers is a good place to start. It's crass and loud and bangy and just, I mean, it's an assault to the eyes, and not in a good way. It just assaults your eyes and your ears. It's so long and so dull, and every character feels like they're written the same, and they're all kind of like smarmy, and just the comic relief's terrible. The effects are horrible. You can't tell what's going on where or what bits are colliding with. It's just an absolute mess. And again, it was massively financially successful, spawned a sequel where it was Transformers 2, and then there was another one, Dark of the Moon, a kind of a title that makes no sense. I assume that it's because they couldn't use Dark Side of the Moon, maybe. I don't know. But just, like I say, to me, that is everything that is emblematic of what is wrong with kind of modern Hollywood movies. Just like soulless dross. I mean, I cannot, and so long, so fucking long. Like, why does it have to be 2.5 hours long? And with, again, no sense of character, no sense of real. It's just so cynical. You just know this is done to extend a pre-existing kind of franchise in the term of marketing, to just sell people more shit. And it's just something about it where it's like, there is no heart and soul to this movie. And of course, Michael Bay, as we know, isn't really a terrific director anyway. All his movies are kind of, they beat you over the head with just, they essentially beat you into submission. Maybe that's why they were so popular. I think so many people were just beaten into submission that they actually, they immediately left the theatre with amnesia, and they thought, oh, that was good, wasn't it? Yeah, was it? I can't remember. Yeah, it was good. If there's another one, yeah, let's go see that. I can't remember what the first one was like. I just remember it being like really bright and loud, and yeah. I mean, there's a difference between switching your brain off for 2.5 hours and being like lobotomized for 2.5 hours, and I think this is the latter. It's like you genuinely. The reason we have amnesia when you leave is because you've suffered some form of brain damage. That's like irreversible, irreparable. I mean, yeah, I just think this. I mean, like I said, I've only seen that Transformers. I refuse to watch any of the others. And considering they were still directed by Michael Bay, I don't see how there's going to be a discernible improvement. I think even he came out and said the second one was shit, and they let people down or whatever, and that he was going to make an improvement on the third one, which. I guess maybe they did, but I wouldn't say that's not difficult, but maybe for him it is. I don't know. So, yeah, I just, for kind of like where I stand as a film fan, like almost like ethical reasons why I don't like Transformers, but that kind of realized, it's not that I had that realization and I was already going to hate Transformers. I watched Transformers at college because we watched it. I don't know why our lecturer screened it. It was for, I think, to show in contrast as to why this is a shit movie as opposed to the films we were looking at or something. I don't know. I think we maybe just watched it for fun, but yeah, it's just so bad, so bad. It had to be stretched obviously over 2 lectures because it's so long and dull. Yeah, and that, for me, that was like a kind of like a realization point of me of like, when did Hollywood movies get this bad but this successful? Because it wouldn't bother me if it was a flop and failed miserably, but actually that it's successful and like somehow strikes a chord with kind of at the time modern audiences. That's what baffles me, truly baffles me. So yeah, those are my picks, 4-2. Some of them are probably, again, a bit, maybe Transformers is a bit low hanging fruit, but I do kind of hate it and despise what it stands for. And I just think they're terrible, terrible movies. Really, I think really jingoistic as well. And I hate that shit. So that's also another stickler, but that's another reason to hate it for me. So those are my picks. Next video, I'm going to be looking at my number 1, the best or the worst, depending on how you kind of, yeah, I suppose the worst of the worst for me. Might be able to guess what it is, maybe not. There's some I haven't mentioned so far that you guys in the comments have said. Some of them I really do disagree with, but someone mentioned Die Hard. Can't remember who it was exactly. I can't go with that, I'm afraid. I like the first. I mean, if you want to go from Die Hard 4 onwards, absolutely. Maybe I'll actually talk about like different picks in another video, but and why I didn't pick them. But yeah, that's 4-2 done, and join me on the next one. As always, guys, if you liked it, please let me know your views in the comments. Subscribe as always, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.